I'll add a new method, maybe above this pose, though the order does not matter, which I will call save place, because that's what I will do in here. And the idea here is to extract the text that was entered, maybe also add some validation, and then add that place with help of Riverpod. For that, I'll get my entered text here by using the title controller and accessing text. And then I'll check if entered text is empty, and I'll actually also check if entered text is equal to null, or if it's empty, to have these two explicit checks here. And if that should be the case, I'll just return so that no other code thereafter is executed. You could, of course, also show an alert dialog. So you could again show a dialog as you learned it before in the course. You could also show some on-screen validation by conditionally adding a widget with an error message if something goes wrong somewhere here in your widget tree. But I'll keep things simple here and just do nothing if some invalid text was entered. And actually here, Dart tells me that this can't ever be null. So this check basically is redundant. And it can't be null because title controller ensures that text always yields some text, even if it's just some empty string. So with that, we have this basic validation. Now as a next step, I want to make sure that I can save that place in my provider. And to do that, we need access to Riverpod and to our providers, which, as you might recall, we can get by extending consumer stateful widget here instead of stateful widget, and then consumer state here instead of state. And therefore create state also will return a consumer state. And if we do that, we'll have a ref property available, which is provided by consumer state, which we can use to reach out to our providers. And here in this function that is triggered when our button is pressed, we can use the read method on ref to get access to one of our providers without setting up a watcher. And the provider to which I do want to get access here, of course, is my user places provider. And to get access to it here, you also must import it. So you must add this import to user places.dart. With that, we get access to the provider, and with that provider being used here, we can then also access our notifier class that's connected to this provider here, because it's then this class that can be used to add a place, so to call this add place method. And this then allows me to pass on the entered text as a title. And therefore, maybe we should rename this to entered title to be a bit clearer about what's stored in this variable. But with that, we'll add it as a new place. And I then, of course, also want to leave this screen. Hence, I'll then also use the navigator object again with of context. And context is available here in this state class, or this consumer state class here actually. And then, as you learned, we can call pop to leave this screen. Now with that, we should be able to add new places. Of course, I then also want to be able to show them. And for that, we can go back to the places Dart file, so to the places screen widget. And in there, I want to load my places and display them. Alternatively, we could also go to places list and set up our loader there. But I'll actually do it here in places screen. Also because I will adjust my logic a little bit later, and I want to do that in that screen later. So therefore in here, I want to get access to my providers and set up a listener that tells me whenever my list of places changes. And to do that, instead of extending stateless widget, we should extend consumer widget, which is basically the stateless widget provided by Riverpod. For that, of course, we should also import the Riverpod import. And then with that, we will not just get the build context here in the build method, but also an additional second argument, which will be of type widgetRef, which is a type and a class provided by Riverpod, which I'll name ref here. And that's the reference we can use to set up a watcher by using the watch method, so a listener to data changes. and we can watch our user places provider. And of course, for that, you also must add an import to that user places.dart file. With that, we get access to our user places provider, and we therefore get access to our user places, so to the places added by the user. Now, if you hover over that, you will see that at the moment, Dart only knows that this will be some kind of object, or maybe also null. To give Dart a better idea of what kind of data will be returned here, we should go back to our provider and to the state notifier provider we're setting up here, and take advantage of its generic nature by adding some extra type annotations here, you could say. By adding these angle brackets and making Dart aware of the fact that this state notifier provider will use the user places notifier, but as a second generic type, it will then actually yield a list of places, because that is the state managed by user places notifier. And with this annotation added here, as we also did it earlier in the course when we learned about Riverpod, Dart now knows that this here will be a list of places. Well, and therefore this list of places can now be used as a value here for places in our places list widget. And with all that added, the last thing that's left is to go to add place and make sure that this save place method on which we worked before is triggered when we click this button. So therefore, we should use it as a value for this elevated button for its onPressed parameter. And with all that done, if you save this and reload, you should be able to visit this add a new place screen, enter your title and click add place, and it should take you back to the your places screen and you should see your place here. And if I enter a second place, I can also see that added in front of the other place because of the logic we added to our add place method in the provider. And of course, right now this doesn't look too fancy, but it is a start. And the only remaining part of the challenge I gave you therefore now is to make these items tappable so that we then go to this places details screen and show some basic details about the place that was selected.